I'm just going to wait a minute or two because I'm going to start the class with some piece of music that I'd like you to hear. So if you use earphones or whatever on your, if you'd like to get this more powerfully, and I don't know how good your computer audio is itself. So if you do use earphones, this is a good time to get ready for that. It's not a short piece, it's not a long piece, but I think you will benefit from it. It'll give us a whole way to look into our topic tonight, which is going to be about Tiferet. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. But I'm just waiting for a few more folks, and then I'll figure out how to do it. That's going to be the fun part, technically, to see if at all that PhD work really paid off. Right. Back in those days, they didn't have any. Having a computer was a big deal, and you had to get your dissertation typed by someone who had a word processor. It was like and you paid $400 or $500 for somebody to do it. And today, everybody does it on their own. So, does everybody know everybody? Let's see who's new on our group here. Anybody? Hi, everybody. Good. Okay. So, let's begin by just introducing this piece that I wanted to share with you. It's let me see, advanced computer sound only. I got to bring it down now. Share. Let me find it to share it. Hold on. Okay. It's a piece that's called Spem in Allium. Okay, it was composed by Abraham Tallis, believe it or not, Tallis. And I want you to listen to this carefully. Just let yourself go, right? Let yourself go and just see how it works. It's a motet, 40 voices. Okay, and I'll tell you a little bit about the piece and why I like it so much. See if this works. Are you getting it?
We can't hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now I
Okay.
can.
So I'm not going to give you my opinion of this yet, but what did you basically get out of that? What was the basic uh, thing that helped you perhaps feel like? Anybody?
Well, I think it was very spiritual. It almost reminded me of church music.
Yes, it's based on a church phrase. Abraham Tallis. There's a group called the Tallis Scholars
Oh,
that
yes. Yes.
does his work
Yes.
for many centuries now.
Mm-hmm.
Like a few more comments, and then I'll give you why I put it up for you guys. Yeah, Bobby.
What struck me was it captured sadness, kind of being with sadness, a compassionate being with sadness, at the same time tremendously uplifting. So capturing both in the same experience.
Anyone else?
I felt like I was in an English basilica.
Okay, that's good. There were worse places to be, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, lovely
Deborah, then Mona. Yeah, please.
I felt I was in an ocean swell,
Good word. Keep
a
that word.
rising and a lowering and a
Okay, keep that word.
filtering.
That's
Okay.
good. Keep that. Okay, we all got that.
It's all yours.
Okay, and now Mona.
To me, it felt like heavenly and angelic.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes, Judy. Judy, you have to unmute yourself. Okay.
I was really aware of like times where it was just all of the voices seemed as one and times that they really separated out, and I heard the different groups and different voices.
Keep that in mind. Excellent. Anyone else? Gary, go unmute yourself.
It also sounded like a conversation. Of course, I couldn't tell what the words were, but it had a kind of call and response back and forth to me.
Beautiful. Anyone else? So let me tell you. Yes, Susan, you want to unmute?
I was just going to say that you felt like you were taken someplace out of this world, and a kind of place that words wouldn't have taken you. That there was something about the music and the blending of the voices that you could be in a place that were beyond words.
Okay, good. Very nice comments. Anyone else?
That's great.
Okay, then you can. Yes, Jack.
Yeah, sort of like some of the other comments, being out of this world, but the conversation part of it resonated with me, that some of it was very grounded in this world. It was almost like a conversation between people on this planet and in the spheres.
Okay. Diane, you want to say something? No? You don't have to. It's okay. It's up to you.
I'm enjoying it. I think that the
Okay.
problem is that when you wait then to listen to everyone, it's all been said.
Well, one word
fantastic.
one word I'm looking for has not been said. Okay, the reason I brought it to you, it is about harmony.
Ah.
That's okay, let me tell you how I got to this piece. About 2 years ago, the summer before last, I was up out in Western Mass, and there's a wonderful museum, which I'm sure all of you know, the Clark in Williamstown. Fantastic place. So I was there to see what they have, and they had an exhibit. And it was a beautifully nice sized room, all glass. It's the room that's opposite the place where you sign up, if you know, where you go in and buy the tickets, and it's the opposite room. And there were 40 speakers set up in a big circle around the room. And there were benches in the middle to sit if you wish. And this is by a woman named Judy Cardiff. She's no longer with us. It was a traveling exhibit. It's gone all through the world. And you could listen to it in two ways. You could go walk around and hear each voice of the 40 voices individually. as you walked around, or you could sit in the middle and just. Right. So it blew me away. I had to go in a couple times. It's not a long piece, 9 or 10 minutes, and it blew me away because I felt the ocean swell.
Mm-hmm.
I felt spaciousness. There was room for me to be in there. It didn't lock me out like sometimes heavy metal does. Locks you out, Once to lock will lock you out. And more importantly, what it did was it offered you this at least it's a terrible word to use, but you'll forgive me for it. I came out feeling hopeful. So forgive me. Because of the fact that harmony is possible. Harmony is possible. That's the reason I'm bringing that up is because what I'm talking about tonight is splendor and how one harmonizes justice and mercy. So let me just get back to a little bit of what, let me see what I have here. Okay. So as we approach the holidays, it becomes clearer that, 1 second, I want to see if I can get you and get my other thing on at the same time. I don't know how, yes, I got that, and I want one more. Hold on, where's the other one? Okay, hold on. This is all very complicated. Okay, so as we approach the Yamim Noraim, the sort of awesome days, I call them the awesome days. People call them the days of awe. But I say they're awesome days, right? Between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we'll encounter throughout our ritual the striving to overturn judgment and or justice, if you want to use that word. And we want to overturn it and bring it to mercy. To move the image is to move the Almighty from the seat of judgment to the seat of mercy. And we are told that justice we should pursue. So why not plead for justice and not for mercy? And basically because what justice offers, if done correctly, is a crucial role in creating fairness and faith in our systems. The rabbinic judicial system was bar none for its profound understanding of the law, and yet it seems that deeply embedded in that system were also the embers of mercy. So what is justice and what is mercy? And how does one harmonize it without defeating either of them? Now, for the Kabbalists, it was the harmonization was simple in a way, because they created this understanding of Tiferet, which we'll talk about. However, I got interested in this whole idea of Chesed and Gvura, and I want to understand it in psychological terms. So, as is my want, and perhaps it's something I have to recover from, I might find a recovery group for this. I went to Freud. In Freudian language, for those of you who are familiar with Freud, let me just try to get smaller so I can see you. Okay. A second, gallery view. Okay, I got you there. Okay, so I'm going to go back. Hold on. Okay. So when you get to Freud, he uses two terms that have been talked about for a long time. One is eros. And eros is an equivalent of what we say benevolence or mercy, right? Or eros. Now remember, to be erotic has nothing to do with being sexual. We have this idea, we call it eroticism. To be erotic, to be in eros with something, is to be totally given over to it. That's what eros says. You're totally given over to it. And in being given over to it, you basically benefit from its life-giving force. So for Freud, eros was life-affirming. And then Gevura was thanatos, which is basically the reality of death and destruction. So you had this sort of countervailing kind of idea, eros, benevolence, and thanatos, death or destruction, love or destruction, sex and death. Okay, those are the two things that perhaps Freud talked about a great deal. He, of course, had a big problem, and that problem was he was not capable, it seems, for his own psychological reasons, but I was not his therapist, and I'm sure it was very expensive to be Freud's therapist because you had to sit and listen to Freud, is that he could not harmonize those things. It was either one or the other, or one is associated with one stage of life, the other with another stage of life, but there was no way of finding harmonization. There was no way of getting away from that duality. The duality. So what I want to talk about tonight a little bit is how does Tiferet in the Kabbalistic tradition, which we'll talk about in more detail, how does that create a possibility of creating non-duality? All right? Now, for me, this is an ikerzach. This is an important thing. We have to get away from this binary understanding of things, and we have to get this. So we'll get there. So I found a wonderful piece by a fellow named Michael Taft, which Freud wrote a book in 1927, before he wrote Civilization and Its Discontents, called, you may be familiar with this book, it was called The Future of an Illusion, 1927. And it was an attempt to create a psychoanalysis of religion, its origins and its future. In it, Freud rejected all religion, saying that it is merely a kind of wish fulfillment. Religion was a fantasy focused on the oldest, strongest, and most urgent wishes of mankind. For example, the desire to escape death and to live forever. Freud, being Freud, also included the Oedipus complex, saying that God was a result of a juvenile longing for the Father. For those who are therapists and psychiatrists, please forgive my simplicity in this. Now, that would be the end of the story, except I found in this article something very interesting. As he explains in the opening of Civilization and Its Discontents, which, by the way, you understand, Freud as a psychologist or psychiatrist may not be that important because he's been superseded. But Freud as a important intellectual thinker, of someone who talked about his times and understood his times, is still quite valid. So in the opening of Civilization and Its Discontents, Freud had given a copy of The Future of an Illusion to his friend, and this is a name of somebody you've probably never heard of, Romain Rolland. Some of you have heard. Oh, it's interesting, because he lived down the block from me. No, he didn't. Now, Rolland was a Nobel Prize winner in literature, and he became a major influence on Freud's work. And Rolland read The Future of an Illusion and wrote back that he doubted whether Freud actually had unearthed the true roots of spirituality. Rolland was a fascinating figure in his own right. He was a renowned mystic and a writer. Hermann Hesse, right, dedicated his novel of spiritual self-journey, Siddhartha, which was so important to us growing up in the 60s, Siddhartha. I even reread it once and I said, not bad, a little simplistic, but not bad. So important. And he dedicates the book to his dear friend Roland. That's what Hesse does, his dear friend Roland. And well-versed in Eastern mysticism, Roland had studied Vedanta philosophy through the works of Swami Vivekananda, who was a chief disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, who was important for bringing a lot of this to the West, right, along with Krishnamurti and others, Vedanta teaching, which is Hindu, okay, Hindu the teaching. And it's probable that Roland was well acquainted with the concept of non-dual awareness because of his study of Vedanta, which talks quite a bit about non-duality. Thus, when Roland read The Future of an Illusion, he was unconvinced, and he wrote to Freud saying that he was sorry, but that Freud had not properly appreciated the true source of religious sentiments. As Freud relates it, Roland said, and I quote, The true source of religion consists in a peculiar feeling, which Roland himself is never without, which he finds confirmed by many others, in which he may suppose is present in millions of people. It is a feeling which he would like to call a sensation of eternity, a feeling as of something limitless, unbounded, as it were, thank you for bringing it up, as it were, oceanic. Oceanic, the swell, if you remember saying that. And this feeling, he adds, is a purely subjective fact, not an article of faith. It brings with it no assurance of personal immortality, but it is a source of the religious energy, which is seized upon by the various churches and religious systems, directed by them into particular channels, and doubtless also exhausted by them. One may, he thinks, rightly call oneself religion on the ground of this oceanic feeling alone, even if one rejects every belief and every illusion. And Freud admitted that he had no personal connection to this oceanic feeling. He didn't experience it at all. I feel a little bad for him, but he didn't experience it at all. But because of his respect for Roland, which was immense, he investigated it, and he made some interesting connections in civilization and his discontents. And first he described the solidity and the seeming permanence of the ego in the average person. And then he goes on to note how anyone who has fallen in love has felt some sense of ego dissolution and merging with another. There are also pathologies which the ego is damaged and disintegrated in some way, as Freud, of course, was very well aware. But then Freud went on to do something, well, world-changing, at least according to this author. He created a scientific model of the non-dual state based on his developmental model of the ego. And he would say, every child starts out in the state of oceanic consciousness. A sea of sensation and emotion with no boundaries at all. They cannot tell themselves from their mother or any other outside object. The ego is essentially a boundary marker, a delineator of the self from every other thing. The development of the ego over time can be thought of as a sharpening and clarifying of that boundary. And he continues, and I'll be finished in a moment, as we grow into adulthood and our ego becomes mature, most people lose the ability to contact the earlier oceanic feeling because they cannot drop the acute feeling of separateness created by the ego. They have lost the sense of oneness with everything and are stuck, and this is where Freud was stuck, if you will, stuck in their two-ness, T-W-O, two-ness. It's also the capital of Tunisia, but that's the different story, as it were. So practicing meditation, I would suggest, in doing inquiry and other methods, constitutes a path for returning to this original undifferentiated state of the mind, at least for some time. The reason I'm bringing that up is that ultimately, ego development does not resolve the issue of justice and mercy, of chesed and gevura. But I think the Kabbalists and their traditional ideas of the Kabbalistic tree of life do present a possibility of dealing with it, of creating harmony and balance. The word tiferet comes from the word pe'er. Pe'er means something beautiful, something splendid. I like the word splendor rather than beauty in a way. You know, splendor is just, somehow it's more expansive a word necessarily than beauty. But it also, of course, in the Kabbalistic tradition, and is that it sort of creates this harmony and balance. And if you remember about Kabbalistic tree of life, I don't want to assume that you know it well, but you basically have a central pillar. Okay, a central pillar that goes from Keter, if you will, the infinite mind, to Shekhinah, which is the indwelling presence of God in us and the world, and along the way, which keeps it steady, is Tiferet, which balances Chesed and Gevura. Then underneath that, you get Yesod, and Tiferet uses Yesod, foundation, or the phallic. You can also deal this if it's seen as a body, right? You have the heart of Tiferet. It eventually affects the desire to come together with the feminine. So Tiferet is the masculine, and Shekhinah is the feminine, and there is this desire to create balance between the two. And by doing so, you keep the central pillar balanced. And Tiferet is the ultimate structure of that balance. And the balance is to cancel out. And this is what happens when you try to get into this a little bit. I've been spending a lot of time trying to figure this out. What is Tiferet? How is it different than Chesed and Gevura? And of course, Chesed, loving kindness, associated with Abraham. Gevura, associated with Yitzchak. Bear that in mind on Rosh Hashanah when we read the story of the binding of Isaac, right? The Kabbalists have their way of understanding it. But what it is basically is a principle of balance and harmony. And what it produces, and this is very interesting, what it produces is consciousness. Mercy and judgment, or as countervailing forces in the world. Abundance on the one hand, and the need to, if you will, allocate that abundance so it remains possible to benefit from it. That, if you will, polarization, that dichotomy, that duality, Tiferet is the realization that that is a polarity that has to be brought together. And that's the principle of the birth of individual consciousness. Some might say even that oceanic feeling is that we are all consciousness, or that, that's all we are, is consciousness, and that we are with our consciousness in the world, or we are consciousness itself. I can't get involved in knowing all that. It also begins to have the possibility in our teachings of having the beginning of movement. It becomes a place of equilibrium of consciousness and beauty. There are many symbols for Tiferet, which are wonderful. The sun is a wonderful pillar, a wonderful symbol of it. And the sun is also represents our basic character building. Sometimes it's seen as gold, and gold also represents character refinement, right? Gold. It is also associated with ruach, breath. Interesting. Ruach, breath. It is through breath that one can get that sense of Tiferet, and it's almost as if man becomes aware of one's own self, and by becoming aware of oneself, one can form, and this is so important, one can form the capacity to make choices and not see both Eros and Thanatos, Chesed and Gevura, as static and keeping you in place, but ultimately that you can make choices between the two. The task of this consciousness is to give us as individuals the capacity to be in the world, to see ourselves as part of the universe, to have knowledge, if you will. So what happens, if you will, with Tiferet takes the knowledge of good and evil, which of course was the great quote unquote educational process of Adam and Eve, the process of knowledge of good and evil, and basically pushes them into the world of flux, lack of constancy, where they have to keep making choices. There's always crossroads. You've got to make choices. That's what it means to be in the world. That's leaving Eden. Eden, all the signposts are there, this way to this way to that. And I wish life would be that easy, but it's not that easy. So they go into the world, and some say Eros or Chesed, I'll say Chesed rather than Eros, is legislative power, and Gevura is executive power. Let me explain that a little bit. In Chesed, we appeal to how we want the world to be. Goodness, abundance, giving, expansiveness, etc., etc. But we know that at a certain point, in order to get all of that taken care of, I've got to find somebody who's going to execute that. Who's going to put it together that maybe that abundance can be shared in certain ways? You have to put limits on it. It's horrible, right? Shouldn't be all abundance all the time. The cornucopia should keep coming. It's not that way. That's why later Joseph becomes so important in a lot of Kabbalistic thinking, because Joseph says, wait a second, I've got to create Gevura here. Because if we don't have the Gevura now, we're not going to make it. So the creation, if you will, or the consciousness of the Tiferet consciousness, let me call it that, Tiferet consciousness, the consciousness of splendor, is a healing factor. Matter of fact, the archangel, if you will, of Tiferet is Raphael. Raphael. By the way, Raphael is very interesting. It means healer of God. As if God too needs healing, right? And the healing that God needs comes from our capacity to rectify, if you will, rectify what God has created in the world, which sometimes we feel fall short. That's why we have this rabbinic idea of our partnership with God. As I said, it's the male principle. It is symbol, the symbol is the Magen David. The Magen David is this wonderful harmonizing of things that are, going upwards and things that are going downwards, and you intersect them and you create something that has the capacity to be harmonious. Just a few other things. There are virtues in Tiferet, and there are also vices. Believe it or not, even in this oceanic feeling, and even in all of this non-duality, there are certain things you got to be careful to. There's certain virtues. The virtues are self-knowledge, a devotion, if you will, to the greatness that's beyond you, humility, a readiness to make sacrifices for the sake of inner peace. That's part of Tiferet, making sacrifices, particularly of the ego, which is still caught up in the other thing. And the vision, and this is the wonderful thing about Tiferet, if we can get to a Tiferet consciousness, which I hope we can, as part of our high holiday preparation, it's a vision that everything is part of a divine plan, that everything is part of something else, something connected, the interconnectedness. To have that truly be how one feels, or how it experiences. I don't think that's to do with intellectualism at all. I may know intellectually that everything is connected because of physics. I know that. But I have to feel it. And the only way I can feel it is getting away from the brain and getting to Tiferet, which is the heart, the center, the core, the solar plexus, if you will, right? But there are vices in this as well. Things to be wary of. Pride. Wow. Arrogance. I got it. Vanity. And as one fellow I read says, the know-it-all mannerisms that people sometimes project on other people. So I've talked a lot. I want to give you guys a chance to react as well. So here's the thing: mercy and justice, mercy and judgment. As much as they are countervailing forces, the only way to create, using the title of that book that was so popular recently, Just Mercy, is not to say I cannot judge what is true or not true or what is fair. Remember that. Justice means, as I said earlier, justice is an ingredient in fairness. So it says in the Torah, a judge should not be blinded in his judgment or her judgment by the fact that a person may be poor. And what is it going to matter if the rich person who is correct and right, what's it going to matter if I don't say he's right and say the poor person is right? That act of mercy, quote unquote, strikes down the capacity for judgment to be fair. So you got to, it's complicated, of course. It's all part of a package. But ultimately, what I would hope is that our goals for the high holy days are goals that basically talk about how we within ourselves get to that place. And that oceanic feeling, by the way, is not something you stay in all the time. It's not the same as nirvana, by the way. It's not that kind of feeling. It's basically what I felt when I listened to that music. 40 voices can come together and sing in harmony, but each one has his or her voice. It's not putting stuff into a crucible and melting it into one. That's not the oneness I'm talking about. I'm talking about the oneness that says that it is your particular individuality that creates the possibility of my harmonizing with you. And in that harmonization, we will not be overpowered by too much mercy. Remember, you can spoil your child with too much mercy. You can be abusive with too much mercy. And not to, of course, abuse judgment. However, justice is something that all of us have to pursue. Justice you should pursue. People want to be judged in a fair way. And I think we should understand that that's really what we're aiming for, is to help balance that. And we don't balance it by taking either side. And I don't like necessarily the term that we want to look. It's I didn't put the machzor together. I would have done it differently. I don't think our job is to take judgment and go to mercy, because ultimately I want to be judged fairly, and I've made mistakes, and I want to be judged for those mistakes. I don't want to get judgmental. I don't want to punish myself, but I understand that I have to be brought to some sort of trying to get the word responsibility. And the act of tshuva ultimately is acknowledging that there were mistakes made, and those mistakes have to be corrected, have to be dealt with fairness. And there's always ways of finding mercy within justice, but sometimes you don't find justice within mercies. You have to be a little careful about these countervailing forces. So what I wish for us all is to live in a Tiferet consciousness and make it possible for these forces within ourselves, that force for life or that force for destruction. We all have these forces. The source of abundance and the source of thinking about scarcity. Both of them are within us. And that's part of the job of tshuva, is to find a way to live in that Tiferet consciousness, because it is the central part of the central pillar of our consciousness and existence. Everything else comes off of it. Everything else comes off of it. And it helps balance everything. And it helps create the pipeline of bringing together the yin and the yang, whatever you want to call it, the male and the female, whatever you want to call it, heaven and earth, however you want to call it. the meeting and the kissing of the clouds and the oceans, however you want to call it. That's what the goal is of a Tiferet consciousness. I will stop and open for a discussion. I'm sure it was a lot to swallow there. I'm sorry. Yeah, who'd like to start? Gary, unmute.
Yasher Koach. It's amazing. Reb Moshe, and I love this notion of finding that harmony, that balance between chesed and gevura. And I'm thinking about the fact that in our own sanctuary, we actually don't have a Tiferet faith quilt, right? We have a chesed and a gevura, and we used to have the practice of kind of walking in one direction or another. It's actually a sort of dual
No, we do have it.
representation.
We do have it. The Ark.
The Ark, I
is
mean,
art.
that's
the Torah,
a lovely way to
the
think
Torah,
of it.
and that beautiful mosaic cover. This is where we find our center, in the Eitz Chaim, in that tree, which is the Torah.
It's
Understand?
gorgeous.
That's where, and that's why the quilts work so well, because they really helped us focus that there is a center as well.
It's gorgeous. You were talking Freud, and I thought back to an earlier wrestling with concepts of mercy and justice. Shakespeare, in his kind of deeply anti-Semitic play, The Merchant of Venice, right, where he has Portia talking about not a harmonization, but how mercy, which for her was Christian, seasoned justice, right? And she says to Shylock, therefore, Jew, though justice be thy plea, consider this, that in the course of justice, none of us get to see salvation. What we have to do is pray for mercy.
Right.
Fascinating, very dual, no harmonization. It's the struggle between the Christian
and that was very
love and
important in
mercy.
Christianity. In Christianity, it was very important to have these countervailing forces, but the only way out was through Jesus, not through your own. And then, of course, Gary, even in Christianity, there was hundreds and hundreds of years of disputation about whether faith needs works or faith without works. So even there, they began to realize that without a little gevura, mercy doesn't go as far as it can. So, but there, Jesus came to harmonize it, right? Jesus became the
central figure.
Even his death turned out to be both gevura and a chesed in a way. His death is the chesed, the mercy that gave us capacity to be forgiven because of his taking on of all of our sins, etc.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Anyone else? Yes, Bennett. Bennett, you're unmuted.
Okay. Yes,
Bennett is an illustrious psychiatrist. I got to be careful about everything I say.
Okay. And likewise, vice versa. I have to be very careful. But anyway, thank you very much. This is really a terrific synthesis of so many currents and so many important issues. And it's very illuminating and leads me to think about maybe a different dimension of, or different aspect of harmonizing justice and mercy, and something I recently read about Rashi's interpretation of the priestly blessing. So the concept that I'd like to suggest, along with Pe'er and Tiferet, is blessing. Blessing as something that harmonizes all kinds of contradictory tensions by virtue of it bestowing something special. It does involve acknowledging that you're blessed. We recite a bracha, Baruch atah. The priestly blessing blesses us. So there's blessing from both, there's acknowledgement from both sides. So blessing is one kind of overarching, let's say, call it a sensation even, along with a concept, a sensation of feeling blessed or bestowing blessing. And the interpretation that I just pointed to, Rashi's interpretation of the last part of the priestly blessing, Yisad Adonai panav elecha v'yichunecha, that the Yisa Panav is ambiguous, because lifting up your face means to be gracious, but it also means to be prejudiced. The priest, the judge is not supposed to be prejudiced. So we're asking God to be Yisa gracious, and Yisa do us a little favor and sometimes be a little prejudiced in favor of us, and not strict judgment.
Right, that's right, and that plays out through our Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, liturgical, poems and everything else, asking for a little bit of mercy. And then we say, of course, which is the classic thing that we say all through Yom Kippur, all through it, and I've done it many times, is that don't do it for us, do it for Avraham, do it for Yitzchak, who was on the Akedah, remember, and you took him off of that. That's constantly being said. It isn't for us, it's for what our ancestors did. Let me just play on the word bracha for a minute. And there's one way of seeing bracha. This is sort of a Sufi, or a Jufi, I'll call it, a Jufi thing. Maimonides' grandson, I believe, wrote a book called The Treatise of the Pool, Pool, not the one that they had trouble with in River City, not that pool, which, but it's the pool. The brecha is the same letters as the word bracha. Interesting way of seeing it. That the blessing is jumping into a pool and you are totally enveloped by it, and it creates a sense of oneness. So in a sense, a blessing between two people create a new oneness. It overcomes duality, because the giver and the receiver are holding on together and becoming one, because otherwise the bracha doesn't work. When I day a bracha on an apple, I have to make that apple part of me in order for the bracha to be not a bracha levatola, right? Say a bracha on an apple, I throw it over my shoulder, that's not a good bracha. The bracha only works when I eat it. And then what happens? There's no more duality between me and the apple. So this is just my, just my thinking about this. Anyone
Wonderful.
else?
Wonderful.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? I brought you all to a standstill. That's always
Could
wonderful.
I add a
Diane, please, my
Freud,
dear fellow student of Freud.
I almost hate to bring this up in front of Bennett. He's going to know much more than I do, but it's a poignant kind of a postscript to what you talked about, Freud's relationship to Roland. And I think also what you just said, both of you, about the issue of blessing. Mm-hmm. Freud, 3 years before he died, when he was very ill, he wrote to Roland for his 70th birthday, for Roland's 70th birthday. And he said, I want to tell you something that happened 30 years ago. And I think it related to what you said, Reb Moshe, about this oceanic experience, this experience of oneness, this almost Tiferet experience, which he so resisted. Mm-hmm. He said, my brother and I were visiting the Acropolis in Athens, and I had this moment where there was this complete disturbance. He said, I can't even explain what happened. He said, but all of a sudden I couldn't believe I was looking at this building, that it was real, that I was there. And at the same moment, I thought of my father, who never could have achieved seeing it, who never could have made this journey. And the whole time-space thing conflated in on him. And he had this very profound experience that he had never told anyone for 30 years. And he told Roland, and it felt to me as you were talking about him in this experience that it was so much like that these different polarities that he held so powerfully collapsed in time and space, in Greece and Rome, in the present moment, in his father, in the rise of Nazism and his own illness. And it all was present in this moment of utter oceanic feeling that it took him 3 decades to express.
I'm sure his father would have preferred to see Jerusalem rather than the Acropolis, but that's
Yes,
knowing that his father, who his father was. But
yes, yes. But that was
uh,
Freud's belief.
did,
And
did,
his
did
father
Freud
was
ever did Freud
never
ever
around.
get to Palestine?
No.
Because I know he was very pleased when he was asked to write a special foreword to the Hebrew translation of Totem and Taboo. And in many ways, he had affinities to Zionism to a certain degree. You know, it's ironic, he went to see Herzl's play, right? You could correct me on this, Diane, right? The 1896, maybe 87?
Yes.
The Ghetto? What's
Yes,
it
the
called?
Noise Ghetto.
The Noise Ghetto, the new ghetto. And the joke always says, it's so good that Herzl and Freud didn't meet after that, because when Herzl would have said, I have a dream, Freud would have said, well, don't worry, you'll get over it. It has to do with your mom. And in Herzl's case, it did have to do with his mom. He had a very overpowering mother and a terribly difficult relationship with his wife. But that's a separate class we could do on her Herzl. But that's interesting that he took 30 years.
Yeah.
But he really felt that close to Romain Rolland. I did not know about Romain Rolland, to be honest. I didn't realize how well known a figure he was.
Yes, I know. He's one of those people that was so important in his day, won the Nobel Prize,
Right.
but fell into much obscurity, although he's kind of come back a bit now. I think there's been some recent biographies of his.
Yeah.
And he was a Frenchman, I assume.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. My dad was a French major, and he read Romain Rolland and made me read it. His big novel called Jacques Christophe.
Jacques Christophe.
About the life of an artist.
About the life of an artist.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Any comments about what we talked about? Any examples of oceanic feeling? The joke is, I'm so bad on the ocean, I would probably get seasick if I had the oceanic feeling. I would have to be in a steady boat, but try not to get seasick. Anyone? I see. Hey, Randy Cohen. Randy Cohen, how are you? Yes, there's another Cohen in the corner waving to you too. All right. Anyone else want to say anything? If not, we can call it in the evening. And just to as I say, one of the things we try to do with Nishmat Chaim, and I'm glad Bobby's here, is basically deal with this issue all the time. I mean, this is something that it's not something you have to deal with only between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Okay, I'm going to try between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur to get beyond the polarities in my life and create a new sense of view. This is something that is an ongoing pursuit. It's an ongoing practice, and you don't fall backwards. You always come back to a level of hopefully equilibrium, or another word would be equanimity. That's also a possible definition. I don't think it's the same, but equanimity. And that's not easy. And that's why you got to practice. It's not going to happen, by some sort of master stroke. Oh, I got there. And that's why I mentioned the vices of it. The vices of this deferred feeling could be, wow, I got there. And you don't get there. You have to work at getting there. And when you're there, relish it and let it affect your life. That's really the thing. Mm-hmm. That's the proof of the pudding. That's what tshuva is about. Tshuva says, and I've worked on tshuva so hard in my life, so hard. You got to have the proof of the pudding. Is that when the same thing comes up again, you don't do it. That's ultimately behavioral. And your behaviors have to change. And that's not easy. That's not easy. And that's why we're blessed. Thank you for your using of the word blessed, Bennett. We are blessed to be in a community. We're blessed to be in a tradition that believes that only through community can we truly articulate what our needs are, what our desires are, what our goals are. And we know that through that coming together in community. And this year it's going to be the weirdest thing that we've ever experienced. And to be honest, I think it will be memorable. It will be memorable. So thank you so much for being with me. I think this has been recorded, so there'll be people who weren't able to be here tonight might be able to catch it on our YouTube station. And if you have any comments you want to give me, just send them to me, Reb Moshe at tbzbrooklyn.org. I'd be glad to hear it. And let's hope that we'll have first and foremost a gesund Jahr. A gesund Jahr. Das ist die erste Sache, right? A gesund Jahr. Nachdem, after that, so sein a süßen Jahr, should be a sweet year. And the dritte Sache is we shouldn't gain too much weight being at home. We should try to keep in shape. That would be very nice to have a year of some self-control. So love you all and look forward to seeing you all soon. Shana Tova and be well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tova.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Ay, ay, ay.